Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Joe.
Yeah.
Good to see you here.
Yeah.
Welcome, Bart.
What's up, Bart? How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Doing very well.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good. We're just actually we're hanging out in the hotel lobby in Malaga, Spain right now. So we just got here and we were improvising a live show because that's what you do when you're on hotel Wi-Fi. And
Yeah, we were having some trouble with tech, but I think we got it all straightened out. Hopefully, we'll see.
Hopefully we're good. Yeah, but good to see you. We'll call you Bart V because I have no idea how to pronounce your last name. But Bart, for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah. I'm Bart V, or Bart Vandekerckhove. I'll say it once, right? And I'm one of the co-founders. I think you have some Wi-Fi challenges, but I'm one of the co-founders at Raito. Raito is an application to help data platform teams streamline everything data security management. So access requests, access management, the monitoring and the reporting, and everything automation. Access management is a super boring task. Let's be honest. I don't want your data platform engineers to spend too much time on it.
Well, that's why we wanted to talk about it today, because we're really into super boring topics like security and all that fun stuff. So no, we're joking. We actually think it's one of the most important things that's often overlooked when we talk about data. It's something that we rant a lot about, where we feel like security should be top of mind for anyone that touches data. Often it's the last thing they think about. And so, as you point out, making it easier is pretty awesome. But yeah, let's get into it. Data security deep dive is what we're talking about today. I don't know, where to begin? What do you think?
Yeah, so one of the points you mentioned in your notes is that you don't feel like traditional data governance can really handle the task of managing security. So that sounds controversial. So why don't you speak to that a bit? We'll see if we raise any tackles here.
Right off the bat with my most controversial statement. Yeah, no, indeed, it's actually the idea of Raito came about when I was still at Calibra, so the data governance vendor. And that's where we saw data governance teams really struggle with scalable data security, data access management. I think in essence, there's a huge divide between what data governance does and what the data teams do. So data governance has the policies. They have to, have data security, data access management policies for regulatory compliance, for their internal standards and policies. But there's a huge gap between the policies and what actually happens. And if anything, when we talk to data platform teams, they feel like it's more of a hindrance, right? They get the policies, but they don't have the tools to implement them. And it's just, there's so much distance between the data governance policies, whether it's data quality or data security, and what is actually happening in the platforms. It's a huge bridge. And in fact, what we see is because the challenges of bridging that gap puts a lot of work on the data platform teams. And that's why you see a lot of data platform teams talking about data governance, data security, data quality. They're actually building their own solutions to bridge that gap. And hence, that's a bit our position. Like, if you want to do data governance well, you have to also work with the data platform teams and not just create policies and standards. You also have to provide them the tools to help them implement them.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my experience with open source specifically, this has been a big pain point. Like, you have these very good open source tools, but sometimes getting the open source tools to play nice with the right access management tools can be painful. And so, and it can be a big hindrance to use of data, basically, right? I think we often frame security in terms of negative issues, right? If you don't secure your data, you'll have data breaches, you'll violate government policies, you'll be legally liable. But also, if you don't have good data security, people can't actually use the data, and that's an issue I've seen over and over again. And it's often comes up in open source platforms that are otherwise quite powerful, where you have these problems.
I mean, exactly that, Matt. It's the way that data teams do data security and data access management today exposes them to a dichotomy, right? It's either you move fast, you can innovate, and everybody has access, or you want to be secure and want to strictly manage access, and then people have to wait way too long for data. And that's a direct result of using IAM technology that was built for access management at the perimeter. Now you want to apply that technology for access at the data set level, and it really breaks, right? And that's what puts these data teams in that dichotomy, in that choice.
Yeah, it is kind of a dichotomy, though, isn't it? Because I think with IAM, especially, and at least how the cloud providers do it, it is at the perimeter or the systems level. But it does, as far as we've experienced, I don't think data has really been the consideration. It's more about hardening the access to resources in the cloud, right?
And then just having a robust tool set that allows you to actually grant access, which is kind of one of the things you were talking about. Let me ask you this: Are you talking about like a zero trust type of approach, or is it really something else that we're discussing here?
Yeah, indeed, it's about zero trust. So, what is zero trust? So, zero trust is you assume the barbarians are in the gates, right? So, you assume your security perimeter has been breached and the hacker is in your network or in your cloud data provider. That's zero trust. And so, what you want to do is, reduce the blast radius, reduce the harm they can do, the data they can access, the encryption they can do. So that's zero trust. So you assume basically what it means is you have zero trust towards anybody in the network. And what it means for data teams is, well, you limit access to the data a user absolutely needs. So least privileged access management, only the data they need, you give them access to, but also the infrastructure, the Airflow jobs, dbt, only give them access to that, or the code repositories, right? In GitLab, GitHub, you only give them access to the code repositories they need to work on their product. I know. And in that sense, the idea of access management is, it's not just least privileged access management to the data sets anymore. It's to everything, because I think last week there was a major breach on the Git repository. Not sure whether it's GitHub or GitLab, where they just got massive access to code repositories. And through that, you can also do a lot of harm. So you really have to have least privileged access management to all the tools and the data that you need to work, and create value from data.
Okay, so yeah, I think it was GitLab that had the issue last week. As far as I remember, I don't know. I don't want to name names. It was one of the two. But let's talk horror stories for a second, though, right? I'm sure you've seen some pretty gnarly things. Giving maybe anonymized examples, what are some things that you've seen go wrong in horrible ways? And I guess the next question is, what would you have done to prevent it?
Yeah, I mean, the ways that it's horrible, it's when it gets in the news, right? Recently, the service accounts, for instance, is a big risk. I think service account is actually a major risk, because that's where you often give long-standing access and you completely forget about it. And that's how early this year, Microsoft, I mean, this is one of the biggest tech companies in the world, with one of the smartest engineers, you hope so, in the world. And they got breached because they had a service account used for testing, completely forgot about it. It had admin privileges, right? That service account got breached and started sending out mails and so forth. For service accounts, what I would have done differently is really monitor their access and work with ephemeral rights. So instead of giving them long-standing privileges and just completely forgetting about them, you give them ephemeral access, so access limited in time, but also access just enough access, so access to what is absolutely needed. So in case you do forget about it, because I mean we're only human, right? So we'll forget about the service accounts. The privileges disappear after a while, or if in the meantime they get breached, the harm done is limited. That is currently, with how you manage access today, it's a very difficult process to implement. And that's why you get admin rights. That's why people forget about it. I had admin rights at an employer One of my previous employers, I had admin rights. I never told anybody. I loved them. They're great, right? But
Until
if
you
I
mess
got
up.
breached, yeah, there you go.
If you make a
There you
mistake,
go.
that's the other danger with admin rights, right? If you personally make a mistake, the blast radius for your errors can be much larger than it should be.
Yeah.
There's a
Hopefully,
meme
you
about
know
it.
what? Yeah,
There's a meme about it. Nothing wakes you up like coffee or dropping a database in production. That's why you need those guardrails.
That's definitely true. Well, I mean, how many times have we seen this too, where we've had to tell, say, clients give us rights to certain things. We never ask for admin access. We always ask for the least amount of access we need. But we'll often have to call them up and say, we need to remind you to actually turn off our access,
Yep.
because we notice that we're still able to get in. And I think Matt and I, being the upstanding gentlemen that we are, we don't want access to your stuff. In our engagements, we typically tell people we don't want any access.
Increasingly, that's the
Yeah,
policy.
we
It
don't
just
want
causes
anything if we don't have
problems.
it. If we don't
Yeah.
need to have it, we don't need it.
But I mean, that underscores there's this tension between granting, being secure sometimes and getting things done. So
Yeah.
how do we manage that? Like, what's the right approach to like balancing these considerations with human beings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And ideally, you put that in the hands of we're talking about data here, so I'll just talk about data, not just all other applications, but particularly for data. Ideally, it would be the data owner or maybe a steward in their team in the domain that manages access for their domain, for the data products in their domain. But uh, that brings me back to the ultimate challenge that data teams face today, and that is the fact that there's a huge divide, not only between the data governance team and the data platform engineers, but also between the data team, between data and identity. So on the one hand, identity users and groups are managed in Active Directory. This is owned by IT or information security team, but it's a data team that have to manage privileges. So they have to request to put users in groups in AD, takes several weeks. Sometimes they don't want to wait, and then they put it in Terraform scripts where they create their own logical grouping of users to access certain data product. It becomes a mess, so it becomes impossible for the data owner or the data product team, data domain teams, to manage access to their data products.
Yeah. So what's your solution in general? I mean, I think there are two angles to this, right? Security is always about both technology and human problems too. So like how do we attack this issue from those two points of view?
Yeah. I mean, security is definitely multiple lines of defense. And what we're seeing today is, a far cry from best practices. We see a lot of organizations not caring about security, CEOs not caring, senior leadership not caring. But I expect this to change. So there are new regulations on the radar. In Europe, we got the NIS2 directive. In the States, it's not a regulation, but you have the NIST CSF2 standard. But both of them have accountability for senior leadership. So as with anything, particularly with security, often leadership is very inactive until something happens. Now it's a regulation. So I think with senior leadership now being accountable and liable for data breaches and security issues and regulatory fines, I think something's going to happen. And first thing is you need that security culture, right? If management doesn't care, why would you care as a data engineer? That's one thing. And then also just you need better tools to bridge the gap between identity and access. Tools where it's very easy to manage access, to push that responsibility to the data owners. Tools for you to report who has access to what and usage to the CISO, and automate that as much as possible. And that is really, that market is really developing. We were recently talking to an identity provider. Identity providers typically manage access at the perimeter, and they also thought like this market is developing massively. We need to have better ways to manage and monitor access at the data set level.
So where should that management happen? Should it be centralized or should it be decentralized somehow? Or third option, does it depend on how the data teams are structured?
Well, it depends, right? And it can depend on how the data teams are structured. I would also say it depends on the sensitivity of the data, because, well, ideally you federate it as much as possible to the data team. So you say to them, this is your data products, you manage access, streamline it, take ownership, take us out of the equation. And then you go really fast. Now, in those data sets and those data products, you'll very likely have sensitive data or data that is regulated by privacy regulations, security regulations, maybe industry standards. And you can't expect the data domains to really understand all the intricate details of those regulations and apply the appropriate data security controls. So there, I believe, you still need some central control. So the data governance team should still control what happens with that sensitive data. And there, my personal belief, this is how I see it, is push access management to the data domains. Let them have, let them take ownership of that process, but then give the central data governance team still control over how they mask the data or how they filter the data to ensure compliance, like with access to sensitive data, data sovereignty, data localization can all be solved with columns, column filtering, column masking and row filtering. And that should be with the central data governance team. That's how I personally see it.
Oh no, I was going to say you mentioned culture and security before. In your experience, what are some of the ingredients of a good security-minded culture?
Yeah, a good security-minded culture is, I think, it's a culture that respects their customers more than profits. So it's a culture where the policies are in place, where you work closely with the business, where you work closely with the engineers, and there's sufficient training in place. I don't think it's a culture where you have just some policies and some mandatory trainings. It's a that doesn't work. I've been through them. You just click through those trainings and you ignore them. I think it's an organization where senior leadership truly understands data security, truly understand what it means for the organization and what it means, what the implications are for your data development process. If they don't understand what it means for an engineer or a data owner to do this properly, it's not going to happen because it's going to be translated in priorities. And we're talking to we're talking to data platform teams that are very security minded. They want to work with us. They want to work with Raito, but when they want to start, they get different priorities from up, right? AI. This sometimes happens. Oh shit, we got to do AI now. Well, forget about data security. Everyone on AI, and then you get these examples where somebody who couldn't get access to salary information because of access controls used used an LLM. I think it was Microsoft Copilot. Used Copilot to get access to the CEO's salary information, right? Because data
Oh
security
wow,
wasn't important. Yeah,
That's amazing.
so
So they could just bypass everything, and then the RAG system would access the data and the top secret data in the database, and then print it back to the console.
wow.
That is amazing.
Wow, that's
it's a lot of
insane.
fun examples.
Well, you mentioned the interesting thing though. You mentioned sort of the difference of being profit driven versus customer driven.
Yeah.
Now, customer driven is really amenable to good security culture. The interesting thing with that is, at least in the United States, it's all about the bottom line, all about profits, right? So, how do you reconcile these two? I mean, what would you how would you talk to a CEO of a company who is very profit motivated, is really gung ho about AI this week, and but also maybe feels that the customer is they're there to give us money. We're not there to serve them. I think this is a mentality
Yeah.
that's pretty pervasive, though.
Absolutely. But what I personally think is that um, customers are becoming more privacy and security aware. In Australia, I forgot the name of the company. A couple of years back, a big telco, they got breached, and
Oh, Opus, I
as a
think it
result,
was.
yeah, Opus, yeah,
Yeah,
could be.
I was there when that happened. Actually, that was a big screw up.
There you
Like
go. They
heads were
lost
gonna roll on
10%
that
of
one.
the. Yeah, well, they lost
Yeah,
10% of their customer base, which is 1
yeah.
million customers. They took their business elsewhere. So
Oh yeah.
if you look for the Google Trends and you look for data breach, you'll still see the huge spike from Equifax, and that's going to be a small data breach compared to the data breaches coming, right? And with more and more data moving to the cloud, with more and more different use cases, it's going to happen more and more frequently if it's not baked in your culture and in your development process. Security as an afterthought, the way we do it today, add a user to a group, give that group access to the data set. It's a slow process. It's a painful process. It sucks. And it also exposes, because of that, it exposes the organization to either huge security risks or opportunity costs because you can't move fast. And if that doesn't work, I mean, there's a huge stick uh, coming our way, and that is the security regulations. And I mean, I understand CEOs that are not that concerned. I'm CEO myself. You got a lot on your plate. Sometimes you got other priorities, and sometimes it takes a security regulations. Regulation takes fines to take action.
How do you think about the problem of social engineering? Because so many of these attacks, I mean, we certainly have seen attacks through faulty code, through misconfiguration, through non-updated software, but like a lot of attacks come down to social engineering still. So how do you think about that?
I would say it's becoming the preferred tool in the toolbox of hackers. There's a huge misconception of hackers. When you say the word hacker, the image that comes to mind is a kid with a hoodie that hacks Rockstar games with the TV remote, right? Because that gets the headlines. That's the cool stuff. That's what we report about. But hacking is becoming a day-to-day job. I mean, you got businesses in Russia and China whose job it is to hack. Recently, there was a data breach where they found the hackers because one of the office workers, one of the hackers, left her PII, left it in during the hack, so they could just trace it back. They found her PI and traced back to the office of hackers. So
That's awesome.
these people,
Data privacy for hackers,
they
basically.
need the DPO.
New
They
regulation.
need the DPO. So hacking is becoming a job, right? So you have your morning coffee, you drop off your kids at soccer practice, and then you go hacking, and it's going to be more and more. And they're going to use social engineering because last week there was the data breach report by Verizon. 75% of data breaches contain the human element. Right? So we are the weakest link, and it's so incredibly easy to manipulate a human into giving away their credentials. Another funny example, I love these funny examples because they tell you often the whole story. There was a reporter who interviewed a social engineer, and what she did was in front of him, she called his bank, and through social engineering got his banking credentials. It's that easy. And that's again because it's so easy to social engineer people, right? Because it's becoming a job, right? You're going to have offices with hackers. Because cloud identity is a huge risk, you really need to reduce the blast radius. But again, using old technology, it's just such a painful process.
What about incentives? You were talking about for CEOs, the regulatory incentive. I think individual data practitioners are going to need pretty strong incentives too. beyond the stick aspect, the punishment aspect, what kinds of positive incentives can we create in lieu of that?
Oh, I haven't thought of that. Incentives for security. The way we talk about this is you have to do it. You have to do it for regulations. Let's do it in a way that is less of a pain. But haven't thought of a gamification yet. Could be a good idea actually.
I think it could. I mean, all too often, we were talking about this today in the context of data quality, how it's people always talk about the negative impacts of, of bad data, but what about reversing it and focusing on the positive aspects of what we're trying to do? I think it's Matt and I are trying to be better in our old age, and so
That's right.
anything we do to maintain positivity,
the world in positive light.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question because it feels like a lot of the security conversations they're very fear-based, and I think rightfully so. But also, near a vendor, and don't take this the wrong way, but when I see security vendors talking about security and fear, I'm like, well, duh, of course you're going to tell me that if I don't do this, that the sky will fall and my company will go bust and everything. I mean, you have no incentive to tell me anything else. Like, oh, ignore security; it's totally fine. I mean, nobody would ever say that, right? Yeah, so it's an interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting one, Matt.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, because the example we were using on the quality side, and maybe we can come up with a similar example for security, is Toyota. And so Toyota, their whole reputation is based around quality. And it's the idea that, yes, your cars are more expensive, but the assumption is they're going to last a lot longer. You'll have fewer warranty problems, maybe better safety as well because of high quality. And the resale value is higher, right? And so I think to some extent, some companies have done this. I know Apple has really pushed the privacy angle of their products. Obviously, there are a lot of things that they probably do wrong in terms of user privacy and security, but they try to frame themselves as a leader in that department. Is there a similar story that companies can tell to investors regarding data security, the positive and negative side? So we're at lower risk of breaches, and maybe somehow we can get more work done, or more exciting things can happen with data because we're more secure. We have better security management.
Yeah. I'll have to think about a way to have a positive spin, a positive pitch for this. But what is happening is the supply chain effect. So in the upcoming regulations, bigger companies are also responsible for security with their partners, right? So if they get breached because their partner got breached, they're held responsible. So all the security requirements are going to get pushed down to the smaller vendors. We're talking to a couple of those because it gets pushed down from their partners. So I guess as a result of that, going forward, you'll need to have those certifications on your websites. Hey, security compliant. Hey, maybe God knows we'll have Raito user as a badge. That would be great. But I guess, Matt, to your point, I think it's going to happen, but regulatory driven. I think it's going to be like seat belts, right? There was a period before seat belts. Somebody came up with seat belts. You have to put on your seat belt. You don't do it for fun, but you do it nevertheless, right? I think this security hygiene is going to become best practices.
Oh yeah, and I think we were alive when before seatbelt laws.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I remember people were like, "Oh, they're stupid. I don't wear seatbelts. They actually make the car dangerous and stuff." And I'm like, "That doesn't make any sense." But there was a lot of pushback. But now it's pretty normal. I know a few people who still don't wear seatbelts, but they're definitely in the minority. I think everyone does it just out of habit now. Not to mention the fact that your car makes a very annoying noise at you when you don't wear one. So
your Uber driver will yell at you, like, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully something happening like that happens with security. I do agree though that the regulations is a big step forward. In the financial services or financial industry, Sarbanes-Oxley, was the thing that public companies really Sarbanes-Oxley was the thing that pushed accountability forward there. Before that was more of the Wild West. It's still the Wild West in corporate America, but less so than it was. You have accountability for reporting and stuff now, or you face some pretty big penalties and so forth. So I know. I remember when GDPR came about, right? That was a big one where I think companies weren't even aware of data, um, as being anything other than something you just collect mindlessly and throw into an S3 bucket and forget about it. Now that there were consequences tied with that behavior, that there's not too many companies that I think take a very promiscuous approach to their data anymore. I'm sure there's
Yeah, I
some,
mean,
but
let's hope that they do a better job at implementing security regulations than those annoying cookie banners and cookie and selection. But
oh my god! Every time we come to Europe, I swear it's just you have to navigate through those windows. It's like this
over and over again,
over and over.
And then sometimes
Bad
the choices
example.
are actually buried, right? Like you have to dig through a bunch of
That's what happens when
I've
you
one
listen
actually, an
to a
American
vendor.
company. That's what happens. Well, one American
And-
company in Salt Lake City, I think it's Sinclair. They own a news source I go to, and to scroll through that thing takes like 2 minutes. I'm not even kidding. I timed it. I was like, it just goes and goes and goes. We actually have a question here from Ryan Duffy. Kind of related to data quality going back there, but he says access is certainly a risk. And in the federated environment where centralized RBAC functionality is consistently applied, with decision makers sitting in the biz. But what about the permissibility of use? Data may be quality, you have legit access, but it's just the wrong data for the purpose. Any thoughts on this?
I think, hey, Ryan, how are you doing? So I met Ryan at a conference a while back.
Nice.
So I think Ryan is referring to purpose limitation, where under the privacy regulations, you can only use data for the purpose you've collected that data for. So the purpose you informed your data or your customers to. I think that should be reflected in your policies, and that's where you have a disconnect between data governance and the data teams. Data teams, they manage RBAC, like Ryan says. But then you have all your policies for permissible use of data, purpose-based access controls, where you should only use data for the permitted purposes. And when you request access, you should give the purpose you request access for. But the tools are not there, right? So the efficient process to monitor whether access is used for a purpose, to request access for a specific purpose, it's just not possible with the way that we do it today with just old school IAM technology.
Absolutely. I was listening to NPR and I thought they had even the US is going to have a data regulation pretty soon.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of state level regulations, but I think there's finally federal legislation happening, and there's a lot of fighting actually in the U.S. over. So basically, when the federal regulation goes into effect, if it gets passed, I don't know that it has yet, but it's working its way through both houses. Basically, it will supersede state level regulations, and to me, that's a hugely positive thing, because one of the pain points in the U.S. right now, last count, there are probably more now, but last time I checked, there were like 15 different data privacy regulations. And for me, from a government policy perspective, one of our priorities should be what I would call efficient regulation. Like, make it easy to comply, make it easy to play by the rules. If you have 15 separate rules, then it's a real pain for small businesses to comply.
The purpose part, right?
Yeah,
so basically you can only collect the data as
for
a specific
generically hoovering up all
right, which is what we
data.
do. We do a fantastic job of that in the United States right now,
Yeah.
right? So I think the permissibility of use and fitness of purpose is something you're going to be seeing a lot more. But I guess how would you, from an let's talk about from an automation standpoint, how would you actually automate something like that, where you're saying this data is we're collecting this data, whatever it is, and it's for this intended purpose, right? And first we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about maybe some related questions to that.
It's a good question. I think you need a lot of metadata for that. So how can you automate purpose-based access controls, right? So you would have to see what the collection point is, where the data has been collected, and there you would have to document for which purpose that has been collected. Follow the lineage throughout the organization where the data flows, and then each time make sure that when somebody requests access to the data, they give you the purpose, and when that purpose matches the purpose at collection, right, access is granted, and then you implement sufficient monitoring. If you have, and now we're going into privacy geek world, but if you have a register of processing activities, right, that's ideally documented. But that's, I mean, that's very tricky. It's a lot of work to have all that in place to automate this. Tag-based policies are really good. Attribute-based access controls are really good, but I think already having good role-based access controls in place, it won't bring you to really purpose limitation, but it brings you, I think, 60-70% there.
That's interesting. It's kind of this notion of purpose-based access controls, maybe. That's
Yep.
It's not quite a role, but it's not an individual. But yeah, that might be something to noodle on.
It's a nice paradigm, certainly, and it sort of ties in with the philosophy of how we're using data, as opposed to just thinking in technical terms, which I think is what we've done in the past. Like,
Yeah.
How do we collect as much data as possible, and how do we extract as much profit as possible from that data without thinking about purpose and how we treat our customers, kind of like you were saying earlier.
Yeah, because even role-based access. So if you say you're applying that at row or column level, even, right? It's kind of like, yeah, it's like, what is your intended purpose of using this for what type of analytics or transactions? Yeah. Huh. Cool. No, well, you can start a startup off that. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
How do you think about revocation? I want to back up to something you were talking about at the beginning, and let's tie it to this notion of data for purpose. So you mentioned that the service account at Microsoft caused huge problems because it had admin rights and no expiration. How, when we're talking about human beings, do we think about revocation in an automated or timed way, in such a way that we actually allow people to get work done? Because that's always the tension, right?
Just don't have employees.
Yeah, that's right. Just ChatGPT.
Just
for
ChatGPT
everything.
runs it. Yeah. Sorry.
I was having this discussion this morning, right? So the difference between the long-standing and the ephemeral rights, with the risk of shilling, but one of our customers, they use time-bound access for this, right? And when we started with that feature, we didn't really understand the applications at the time. We made time-bound access, we thought it was a cool feature, but actually it really helps. And I think so, use time-bound access, so access limited in time as much as possible, which it's automatically revoked, or have business rules that automatically revoke unused permissions, and maybe translate those unused permissions in pre-approved access. So the user, they lose their access, but then when they request it, it's automatically approved, so you don't piss them off. Because when you're the data security guy, you don't want to piss off the whole organization. They're gonna prevent you from achieving your goal, right? They're gonna sabotage you. So it's really a way of ephemeral access, pre-approved access, streamlining the process to request access when you don't have access anymore, and also yearly revisions. And we were talking about this in the context of, when do you use groups from Active Directory and when do you give direct access to a user? Because groups are great, they should reflect policy, not always the case, right? So we say always use as much as possible your groups. There's going to be plenty of cases where you need to temporarily divert from policies, whether it's to deploy to production, investigate data quality issues. You have to build a dashboard, you need to investigate something. There we say, look, divert from the group structure in Active Directory, right? This could be in Terraform, that's where we see this a lot, or email processes. But then find a way, a mechanism to also revoke that access after a certain period of time, or when that access is not used. And this is a way how we see the balance between long-standing and ephemeral rights.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I mean, one of the things Joe and I have talked about for a while is that just in general, in any organization, we need a more, what I would call, observability-based approach to security. In the past, for example, generically, organizations would shut down certain ports, and it's actually a very poor approach to data security, because I knew people in companies I worked with who would use like the NPT port to channel data out and to set up connections, right? If you tried to block SSH, then they would use just some other random port and then connect through that. And that's the thing, like those old school security approaches that are just like ironclad rules, they're very easy to get around. And whereas if you have monitoring saying, hey, what's going on here? Something doesn't quite make sense. Let's investigate further. That's similar to what you're talking about in terms of monitoring when people actually use data and then shutting off access. What do you think about trying to automate more just like security breach detection real time, where you look for anomalies and that kind of thing?
I think we'll definitely need more and more anomaly detection. I mean, like I said earlier, you have to assume you're breached and then take action as quickly as possible. And that's the best way to do that, is to detect anomalies, right? There's somebody who never works after 5 o'clock, all of a sudden after 5 o'clock starts downloading terabytes of data. Do you see people trying different login attempts? These are all like fingerprints for something is happening, and ideally for that person, you can temporarily revoke access, right? So something weird is happening. Oh, let's revoke access for a day. Like add a cool off period so we can ring the person. Hey, are you logging in? Is something happening? And if in this, at least you have multiple lines of defense, because you really need multiple lines of defense. Now we have one line of defense: identity, right? Oh, you're in Active Directory, SSO, we're good, right? We're safe. But actually, that's not the case. You need multi-factor authentication. You need these privileged access management. What we do, you need monitoring. You need anomaly detection, and most of all, you need culture. So the old school way of putting users in groups, SSO, and we're done, that doesn't work anymore for as we're moving more data to the cloud.
Oh, sorry, am I good? Okay. Sorry, there's like screaming kids running around here. We picked the best spot for recording location. So
that's what happens when you record a resort town.
Yeah, Joe and Matt's a travel agency. Come see us for great deals and lots of screaming kids. So back on point, so I think it seems like traditionally, with respect to data now, it's been about maybe masking row and column level security and access. What do you think about these approaches? How they're great and probably the shortcomings of them.
It's a choice, right? It depends on how you model your data. So if you have white tables and then you have to apply mask, you can have sanitized views if you want. So it's really a choice, and you have to take into account multiple factors. If not done properly, column masking can have huge hits on performance, right? So you have to be careful, and a lot goes into consideration. So it's not just a black and white answer. As a vendor, I want to say, yes, use column masking, use Raito as much as possible. But I think the most appropriate answer is it depends.
So I know that everyone's probably thinking about this, who's listening to this, or some guessing. You know, what are some of the best practices in terms of defining how you're going to apply masking rules to your data?
Mm-hmm. Applying masking rules, I think it's something you should apply when you want to more freely share data, and then you have to apply some pseudonymization or anonymization. I think masking, row level filtering, it's a great way to share data securely, right? So that's how I see it. I see it as a quick way to, in a safe way, share data internally or with third parties without creating too many privacy and security risks. What I do believe is that ideally that is centrally governed, and if possible, you apply it dynamically. So when you detect a column contains payment card information, you automatically apply the masking rules. But then allowing also the appropriate teams with the right purposes to see the raw data, right? And that's where it goes back to the purpose-based access controls. You don't want to uniformly apply the masks to everybody. Certain teams still need access to the raw data. And I think in that sense, a masking rule has its advantages.
Yeah, and the other thing I see a lot of people doing is just making views for different users or different use cases and stuff. But that's also pretty risky too, because I think, like you said, with a service account at Microsoft, if you're not keeping on top of your views and doing maintenance and just taking inventory of what views you have, I don't even know, they just sort of exist and you forget about them. And that's I think it's not great. So,
but that's where you need appropriate monitoring.
Yeah.
One interesting approach that I like, but I think it's still hard to implement, is something that Google was doing. I think it was in like GA4, Google Analytics 4, and basically in your account the raw data existed. Well, in a sense, in your account they controlled it, and you could run arbitrary queries, but then they would basically block you from running anything that would reveal individual users. I think the policy was something like they try to create aggregation. You could use an aggregation that would group users into groups of 1,000 or more. If it was less than 1,000, then the data for that group would basically disappear. And I think that kind of dynamic approach is very, very useful, because often, even within an organization internally, you want the raw data there, but you really don't want people running queries that can see down to the individual level. At a higher level, yes. And you can think of applications for this like medical data, right? We want to get statistics on different groups, maybe relatively small groups of 1,000 people, but we don't want people to be able to get down to individuals where we could reveal private information that only the patient and the doctor should have access to.
Absolutely. It's called differential privacy, where you either aggregate or you add noise, different applications, k-anonymity, and so forth. I think it definitely has its merits for specific use cases where you want to do statistics on aggregated numbers, or you can work with data that's being put in buckets, and you don't really need that level of granularity that you have with raw data. It definitely has its merits, and what I think is there's not one fits all solution, right? Organizations will need different approaches, and fine-grained access management, data masking, but also differential privacy are part of the toolbox. And depending on the use case, you take a different tool. So indeed.
So we've been talking about mainly data that's either for probably transactional or analytical use cases. But I think the big elephant in the room is, and you sort of alluded to this with the Copilot example, is generative AI. How do you think about data security in the age of generative AI?
Yeah, I think there you have to be really careful, and I don't want to sound too vendorish, right? Because I see the many posts that say data security and privacy are the main prevent adoption, biggest factors that prevent adoption. I think there are other factors at play as well, but I think data security is a big challenge for Gen AI. If not done properly, Gen AI is like it basically is a gossip gazette, right? If not done properly, you can just bypass all security and privacy controls by just asking Gen AI, and there are ample examples of that. The way we see it here at Raito is see it as a bit of a spy, right? Back in the Cold War, what they did with spies was they gave them limited information. They didn't see the whole game plan. They only needed what they absolutely needed to know to do their operation in case they got captured, right? They couldn't tell the whole plan. And that's how I see it with Gen AI, right? Only feed it the information you absolutely need. And that is a combination of several components. So one is use data access management. So fine-grained access controls where you manage access to the folders or the files or the tables that is absolutely need for a user. but then also use identity federation. So don't use a service account for GenAI, but when GenAI fetches the documents, it fetches the documents under the credentials of the end users. So only allow the RAG to access the data. The end user has the right to access, right? So this way you prevent your end user from bypassing the access controls using GenAI. So two things: identity federation, least privileged access management. So only give access to SharePoint files and folders, tables that the end user is allowed to for the purpose-based access controls under the regulations. But then also have an easy way to request access, because it's what GenAI is doing, it's shortening the time to insights. I remember when, this is more than 10 years ago, I was working on a report at an insurer. They were on-prem, and it took 3 months to create a report. Super slow, brittle process. Of course, in those 3 months, you know it's going to have access to the data. So access management was at speed, at par. But what happened with the whole cloud adoption with Snowflake is the process that used to take 3 months went to a couple of days. So the time to new queries, to new insights is much faster. So you have to keep up to speed with the groups, the controls, and so forth. That's challenging. With dbt, that's reduced to a day, right? You're creating new queries, new insights at high speeds. Data teams are already struggling today to keep the groups in Active Directory and the permissions up to date. It's already a challenge now. What is happening with RAG is it's instant, new queries. It's impossible to predict. So you also need a more dynamic approach to how you manage the permissions. And that's how we see that Raito, right? So it's three things: identity federation. Your RAG should always access the data under the end user's credentials. So that, number two, you apply the appropriate data access controls, which should be fine-grained. But then three, you really need a more dynamic way of managing the privileges. AD groups will only be a hurdle. They will prevent adoption, and people are going to work around it.
How would you approach this problem that I see in the wild often? I'm not going to name any names, but say that you work at I don't know, a financial company or something like that, and you want to use ChatGPT to summarize a bunch of data, maybe analyze it. Your company may not have the enterprise version of ChatGPT. You have your own personal version of it. I see people doing this all the time. Like, write me a report on these data points. Here's some data.
Or even more banal things that go back several years. They'll set up a Google Colab account. So not necessarily Gen AI, but like they want to use some data science tools, but they'll set it up under their personal email and they'll upload company data to that. Like, how do you manage those kinds of things?
Yeah, because this happens all the time. All the time. Shadow GPT, Shadow Colab.
Yeah. I mean, people are going to do it. There's a lot of pressure to be productive, right? People have to be productive. They're under huge pressure. It's even more now with the budget constraints. People have to do it. They're going to find ways to be productive. So there, I mean, maybe use an overlay, a proxy point that they can go through to use ChatGPT. But you can't prevent it, right? If you have a policy that says don't upload personal data or sensitive data in ChatGPT, yeah, well, that's not going to work, right? So you need to provide the tools for people to be productive, to use Gen AI, but with sufficient guardrails. If you don't, people are going to they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to a place where they can use ChatGPT with the sufficient guardrails.
Jason Taylor has a related question. Hi, Jason. He asks, how do you think about text chunking and data access controls, given that some chunks could be more sensitive than others?
Text chunking in what sense?
Jason, if you're listening, in what sense are you talking about text chunking?
Yeah.
I'm guessing you're talking about maybe feeding text data.
I assume we're talking about maybe unstructured data and then
Yeah.
breaking it down into smaller pieces and maybe access control at the chunk level or something like this.
Yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So where you're looking at whether you can manage access at file and folder level, maybe in unstructured data, where you have partitioning, maybe, I don't know. It depends really. You have to apply access controls at the largest denominator, I would say. So that would be at the folder instead of the file level.
Yeah.
Not 100% certain.
Yeah. Oh, we'll wait for him to respond. But I think it's an interesting one though, because I feel like so far I've been doing like row and column based security, talking a lot about that. But there's this whole other world of the text and images and Lord knows what else, right? And so part of it is to get access to that data. But I think increasingly what you're going to find is as that data is being more and more used in corporations for whatever purpose, it's going to be access to elements within that data as well, sort of like the row column based, but maybe what he's talking about, specific chunks of text, for example, like that's off limits. Sort of redactions, like what the government's done for ages when they declassify documents. They, they're not going to give you the whole thing typically.
But it's a hugely complicated problem, yeah, because you can have any user message say it can inadvertently, you can tell your users don't send us private information when you're messaging with our customer service reps. They always do, right? They'll put social security numbers, passwords, emails, phone numbers, all kinds of stuff that you do not want, and so that again is a very complicated security problem.
So he's talking about when you ingest unstructured data. That's exactly So
indeed.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, there. I mean, there you have to look at what is easiest, and you need to apply a way to also discover and classify the data. And sometimes you're limited to just what the technology allows you to do, and you have to manage access to the folder because of the risk that there might be sensitive data in some of the files, right? Because having access management at column level, row level, file level is also a lot of work. And we see companies just starting at the schema or at the container level, manage access there, and then gradually work their way down to more granular levels. So I would say no need to start at super fine grained levels. It's a great destination to work your way towards. But if you can already start at containers, folders, or schemas in case of structured data, and then work your way down to more granular access controls, that's a good way. That's at least how I see it.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think this will be. I'm curious to see how this goes. It used to be exactly, you just like what was it? A lot of companies SharePoint, right? It's just like the dumpster of all your PDFs,
just your Outlook, right? Like
Outlook,
all your email, right, is a huge security risk as well. Like just access to one person's email.
When all the data is going to be sucked into large language models, right?
Yeah.
So that's well, it's happening now. I'm not going to say it's already happening. So all that data that you just kind of like wall off because like I don't know what's in there. It doesn't matter to you. You don't need to see it. Well, now like you say, use RAG and figure out the CEO salary or whatever. So
well, I mean, you talked about RAG, and that aspect I think is a little more manageable. But there's this whole question of managing training as well.
Yeah,
and that is a huge issue, even when consuming public data, because it turns out there's a lot of PII on people just online in various obscure places where no one sees it. But these large language models kind of hoovered all that up in the process of scraping the web. And in many cases, they've memorized it. And that's another like huge pain point. Now that we're talking about fine tuning models on company data, get a whole nother level of that risk, basically.
Yeah,
exactly. With fine tuning, you have that same risk.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome. We're coming kind of on the end of this chat. Really love the discussion. Actually, we have a lot of people watching this too. Like a lot. So congrats. Data security.
Yeah,
people seem to like it. Yeah, it's been awesome. Anything you want to give a shout out for? You can give a shout out for your company. You can give a shout out for any events or cool stuff you have coming up. What do you have coming up? Or what do you want to give a shout out for?
Definitely give a shout out to Raito, of course, the company. Always looking for data platform teams to work with, collaborate on the product. So yeah, definitely reach out if data security is a challenge that you're seeing. Always happy to help. And if it's just a chat, that's already great. So definitely reach out.
That's awesome. It's awesome. Hopefully we'll see you next year, or probably before that. Last time I saw you was in Verbier. So we'll see what happens with that next year. But anything, Matt, we have going on this week?
Yeah. So Joe and I, if you probably noticed, we're in Malaga, Spain, and
I mean, you can tell by the brochure stand behind.
that's
I mean,
right.
that was really the landmark of the city. Now we're in Malaga, Spain right now.
For the Jay on the Beach conference. So it's a data conference basically running next couple of days. We're going to be giving a data engineering workshop on Wednesday. And then I think we have a panel discussion. Was it on Friday?
I believe so.
Yeah.
So this is going on. You have anything else after?
And then so next month there might be some things later in May, but next month there's a conference called the Generative AI Application Summit happening in Phoenix at the beginning of June. And I'll be giving a talk there, kind of talking about bridging the gap between data engineering and machine learning that has traditionally existed. And so actually it's very related to a lot of the themes we're talking about here, right? Because I think for a long time the attitude in machine learning and especially in Gen AI is like just suck up all the data you can. Don't worry about where it comes from or what it is. And
it's really the best approach.
Anyway, if you're interested in that topic, try to make it to the conference, or I imagine it will go online eventually. But post something about that.
That's cool. Here in Malaga, and then in London, what is it? The week of the 21st or something like that. I think we're gonna be doing a low-key happy hour with Chris Tab and crew, probably at Q Bar. I'm guessing. In London, and then we got there's a generative AI summit there too. It seems like every city has a generative AI summit. I just think it's they all call it that at least. So we're going to be doing that back stateside. Might be at Snowflake for Ethan's little party, and then might be at Databricks. And on the 25th of June, I'm doing an event with the MLOps community. We're talking about AI data quality actually. What else? The week of June 17th as well, Sol Rashidi and I are going to be doing a Maven course on maven.com. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. It's about basically jumping from practitioner to executive and insights into that. So anyway, I think that's about it for now. But and we'll be on next week. Thanks to everybody who showed up, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye, or adios, I guess. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Thanks again for joining.
Yeah.
Bart.
Thanks, Bart. Yeah. Great chat.
Thanks for having me. Adios.
Yeah. Take care, man. Bye.